Welcome back to the show as we continue our discussion on the deepening crisis in Iraq. Joining me is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What do you make of battlefield conditions right now in the northwest of Iraq? Is ISIS, or IS as they are called, now on the run?
They're not on the run. No, I think there's what we would call a decisive engagement now ongoing between the Peshmerga and some level of former Iraqi army elements and the ISIS or IS forces. There's a battle going on for key terrain and key, I would say, terrain features, such as the dam, the Mosul Dam. Right now, that's under the control of the IS or the ISIS folks. Clearly, that's something that our side, the Iraqis, want back. With that said, there's villages on a daily basis going back and forth. You're talking about small arms battles, street to street. It's very tough fighting. But for the most part, the ISIS folks have at least been stopped. And let's remember that we're talking about 800 miles, essentially, of a quote-unquote front. It's not a traditional military front. You're talking about literally clusters of activities. So the idea that there's going to be a clearly, on this day, they're winning, we're winning, it's very difficult to do.
So ISIS or IS forces are pretty spread out along that line.
Absolutely. And that's both their brilliance and what makes them difficult to do. What they've been doing, essentially, is they cluster for a specific, they like a swarm a target, and then they go away, they disperse. So this is going to make our job very difficult as a military, because there's two things we have to do. First off, we have to be very precise in our delivery of explosives, of ordnance. And they do kind of go to ground, so to speak, when they're not fighting. Secondly, when they're in a city, we have to be careful to not kill civilian targets of population. We cannot simply carpet bomb.
Will they not deliberately do that, surround themselves with civilians?
Good question. That's always a possibility, especially ISIS being as cold-blooded as it is. I tend to believe not, by the fact that many of the facilities they're operating from are really, you can really determine their military by the fact that they're former Iraqi military facilities. You have to bring civilians in. Now, would they do that? Very possibly. I'd like to believe that if we bring in the right ordnance, the right aircraft, you can do a strafing run with an A-10, and people are going to go running. So that will free up the area for people to do more devastating attacks afterwards. So there's ways of dealing with it.
What is your assessment of Peshmerga forces? That's the Kurdish militia.
They have been the most effective fighting force in the region as far back as I remember. Back in the 90s, they were a very effective force that supported us in our first Gulf War and suffered for it. Right now, they are motivated. They are armed by small arms, although we are now reinforcing them. There's military equipment going in, some heavy, to help them in their endeavors. And frankly, as we've seen over the past couple of days, if they have a little bit of air support, a little bit of logistic support, they are very effective by the fact they took 2 villages back from ISIS or IS over the weekend.
Right. President Obama said that this is a limited campaign, although they've also said that this could last months. There's another thing that we're hearing about is mission creep. I mean, could this get bigger?
Well, it could. As a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought that up. If your audience goes to londoncenter.org, my organization, you can see we laid out a policy recommendation, a strategy to go with the policy recommendation, and a plan to execute it. White House doesn't have any one of those three things. They kind of generally want to know, they want to support the Iraqi government, they want to help do humanitarian work, but what does that really mean? Where are the U.S. national objectives into that? They've never really matched that together. So if they're going to be effective, they have to define what the end state they want to achieve. They haven't done that. And they have to set up some level of time frame for commanders to be able to operate against. They have not done that. And the third point, which may be a bit sensitive for your audience, we may have to go into Syria. The primary command and control, the leadership of ISIS or IS, is now actually in Syria. So this may require us to conduct military operations to include some level of potential boots on the ground. I'm not saying we would invade, but
yeah, that was my question. I mean, can you keep this just to airstrikes?
You can't. Well, you can't. That's where I've argued that in multiple instances, we should really support the Kurds as our boots on the ground. Partner with them. We don't have to be there. And then look for a longer-term NATO solution, NATO-type solution that includes the Saudis, the Turks, the Egyptians, and Jordanians, all of which have modern military forces that we've trained. So there's no reason for us to have to go in ourselves when we've trained military organizations which could do a good job, and plus they're all Muslims. The last thing in the world we want to have is the U.S. going in again as a quote-unquote invader or occupier. I think we would be much better off partnering with others.
Right. What do you make of the fact that the United States, and we're hearing this more and more, that they're now supplying weapons to the Peshmerga?
Right.
The Associated Press reported it. NBC News have reported it here in the United States. They're now supplying weapons to a non-state actor.
Yes. Well, I think the inevitability here, and I think we'll see this play forth, especially with the current chaos regarding is Maliki going to resolve, favorably or not his current situation as the prime minister. The chances are pretty good that the entire government will fall. The Iraqi central government will fall. And you'll see 3 states come out of this: Kurdistan, a Sunni state, and a Shia state.
Because if you're supplying weapons to the Peshmerga, are you not undermining the Iraqi National Army, which actually should be responsible for security throughout the country, and you're also undermining the government and its authority? I would argue that the Iraqi army as we left it no longer exists and is no longer a viable fighting force. Therefore, the first thing you do in an emergency, if you have a cut, you stop the bleeding. The Peshmerga are our best bet to stop the bleeding at this point. Beyond that, you're correct. I think we have to look at what governance is going to come out of this. Again, I think that the potential here is significant for a partition, if you will, of a 3-state solution. That has been talked about before, and frankly, that's the way things are kind of measuring up right now. I think that's what we're going to see. The 3rd state, obviously, should not be IS, but it may be some Sunni-led, Sunni-focused state that comes out of the current situation. Would the U.S. support something like that? I mean, could the U.S. support something like that? I've talked to a number of folks on both the left and the right, and I think there's a great consensus that probably this is the best way to do, especially since there's just no way we're going to send in troops to resecure a central governance for Baghdad, for the whole country. It's just not going to happen. So the next best option, I think, is helping essentially what I would call a soft landing, if you will, for the 3-state solution, where you actually work with those 3 states to establish themselves and establish some level of security. President Obama was asked a question over the weekend. He was very indignant on whether there should have been a sizable U.S. force left behind in Iraq. And his response was actually, well, that wasn't my decision. That decision was taken before I came to office. It absolutely was his decision. I get so tired of the president completely being dishonest about this. I've talked to people engaged in the negotiations. President Obama made the decision to not continue the negotiations for what we call the status of forces agreement. We have that with every nation we're in: Japan, Korea, Germany. That is the foundation of whatever forces are left. President Obama chose to leave that. The military commanders, let me be very clear on this, recommended we keep 25,000 troops. The then commander there, General Austin, who's now commander of Central Command, said 25,000 troops should be the ultimate kind of end state for us to make sure that we can mature the military, to make sure that it becomes a real singular focused Iraq military and a singularly focused government that sustains itself. It was a decision made politically to support President Obama's re-election several years ago. So I'm sorry, my information is completely contrary to what the president's saying. Affected by domestic politics. The other thing is that, does the United States get involved every time there's instability in a country like Iraq? Boy, that's a great question, and the answer is no. We can't. We have to involve ourselves when our national security assets are concerned or interests are threatened. Not every situation calls for that, clearly. In this case, I would argue it does, for 2 reasons. First, we helped upset the cart of apples. I would argue there's evidence that some of the support we gave the Syrian rebels is now coming back to bite us. We were working with Turkey to support some of the pro-Al-Qaeda groups. Well, those pro-Al-Qaeda groups split up, and now one is called ISIS, or the IS, which is now causing a lot of trouble. So we have to clean it up. Plus Iraq. We helped destabilize Iraq in our invasion. And I'm one of those who believes we should not have gone in based on this circumstance. And as Colin Powell once said, if you break it, you own it. I think we have some level of ownership to try to fix this. And therefore, I think we should do something here. Okay, sir, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for having me.